Welcome. Today we'll talk about rezoning, density, and Barnstable's upcoming 2021 Local Comprehensive Plan. We are Barnstable Watch, a group of concerned citizens from across Barnstable concerned about the proliferation of real estate investors operating commercial Airbnbs in our residential neighborhoods that adversely affects our housing availability, affordability, and residential life. After watching how zoning was developed in that process, we're now watching it all. What we'll talk about today: first, your home, and the idea that single-family residential zoning is a burden. Next, your village, and in 2021, village plans being out. We'll talk about some recent zoning proposals, including short-term rentals, accessory dwelling units, and form-based zoning. We'll make a few predictions about what you might expect to see in the upcoming 2021 Local Comprehensive Planning process. We'll speak to our housing crisis and underscore why the 2021 plan matters to you. We'll wrap up with some information about the planning department processes used here in Barnstable. A quick disclaimer: we have some current views. On short-term rentals, we oppose the investor model, which differs from traditional Cape family rentals. On accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, we support the traditional model. And on form-based zoning, we're still learning. First, your home. Did you buy a home in a single-family residential neighborhood? Expect planning department staff's express bias against single-family zoning to permeate the 2021 plan. A quick warning: don't be surprised if you speak out in support of single-family zoning and preserving it to be labeled, as I have, an elitist or a racist. In their words, the town planning director characterized single-family residential zoning as a burden on this community. The ADU proposal, a baby step to pushing back on the legacy of single-family zoning. That view lined up with the views offered by a commercial interest group spokesperson at the very same meeting, who also talked about getting rid of single-family zoning. Next, your village. In the 2010 Local Comprehensive Plan, villages mattered. It started with a vision statement expressing the shared intentions of residents for the future of their town, developed through village vision work and a resident survey. There were village plans, 7 of them. That's consistent with the planning department's job description in our town code, which is to preserve the character of the 7 villages and improve the quality of life for town residents. The first goal of the 2010 Local Comprehensive Plan was to sustain diverse villages and livable neighborhoods for year-round residents while providing housing opportunities for all. In 2021, the planning department says it will abandon village plans. It was announced, we're going in a different direction. You'll get committees, forums, common opportunities. That announcement came before the 2021 planning process even started. It came before any community conversations about it. It came before any town council discussion. And it came before a consultant was selected to guide the process. It came before anything at all. Because in 2021, the planning department has a plan for you, and your village plan would disrupt it. Now let's review some recent zoning proposals. Where the results weren't as permissive as some wanted, count on the planning department using the 2021 plan as a tool to revisit them, to back the truck up and load it up. First, the short-term rental zoning change proposal. In 2019, the Town Council Zoning Subcommittee recommended an anything-goes approach. It would have permitted non-resident real estate investors to use all of our housing stock here in Barnstable as commercial Airbnbs. Those are not your Cape family rental traditions. It was an investor welcome mat with no limits and one-night stays. That duration is even what Airbnb, the corporation, categorizes as a high-risk rental. The approach was contrary to mainstream rules in tourist communities across this country and in those communities with housing challenges. In 2020, the town council pulled that proposal. expect it or a way around it to come back. In 2021, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled that short-term rentals are incompatible with single-family residential zoning. The zoning subcommittee's proposal tracked the Realtor Lobby's proposal as well. The Realtor Lobby adopted that policy and then paid for a survey to identify, quote, politically popular messaging to sell its policy to our decision makers. In their words, "We have a large housing stock. It's just not being used to house our residents." That was the Barnstable Planning Department staff in an Airbnb conversation with the Housing Committee in 2019. So the town hasn't actually acted like we even have a housing crisis. In 2019 and 2020, the Town Council Zoning Subcommittee, the Planning Board, expressed no concern about housing availability, housing cost, or the impact on locals who need year-round housing due to the proliferating investor model short-term rental businesses. The town has the independent research and analysis on that. It comes from places like the George Washington Law Center, McGill, Forbes, Harvard Business Review. The town has that and ignored it. We continue to proceed under an Airbnb, anything goes approach. Here's the thing. This prior decision to ignore the housing crisis in the Airbnb context that adversely affects housing availability and costs has actually exacerbated our housing crisis. We've all heard, and far too many times, about residents needing to leave their rentals in the spring to make way for landlords to earn higher profits off short-term rentals. That choice to allow more and more, in fact, unlimited short-term rentals, generates tax dollars in this town. Now, hold that thought. So now that we have a proliferation of short-term rentals with homes removed from our housing stock and used as Airbnb businesses, the answer? Well, let's increase density to compensate for our prior policy decision. And guess what? All that new building, all that new density, that will generate more tax dollars too. Our neighborhoods, our villages, and our community actually shouldn't be for sale to whatever policy generates the most tax revenue. At a town council workshop on the short-term rental zoning change proposal, a counselor asked the following question. If I bought a home in a residential neighborhood on a cul-de-sac with 4 homes, do the draft regulations let all of the other homes around me be used as 365 night per year Airbnbs? The answer, yes. Advocates that are now urging the town to increase density and to enable more and more building due to housing needs were either advocating for or silent on that proposal. This includes entities such as the Housing Assistance Corporation that stood down on the proposal to allow the conversion of our homes to Airbnb businesses. There are 2 very different kinds of short-term rentals. The first are homes. That's where families who are part of this community and live here at least sometimes choose to rent their home out to others from time to time. The other kind are businesses. That's where non-resident real estate investors buy houses as cash cows, removing them from the housing stock and driving up our prices. The town blurred these 2 kinds, which are very different, in its survey and in its draft regulations. Let's not anymore. Imposing no, even limited residency requirement as a condition to short-term rent a home decreases housing stock, increases prices, and puts investors before locals. While housing was irrelevant in the short-term rental zoning change proposal, suddenly, when the dialogue becomes about building and density, housing skyrockets to top priority. It surged to the primary priority in the ADU discussion, and it drives the form-based zoning proposal, which is said to encourage compact residential development. In the ADU discussion, multiple public officials who have converted homes to Airbnb businesses urged the town in public comment to increase density in order to meet our housing needs. Next, let's talk about accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. In 2020, the zoning subcommittee proposed to change zoning to allow non-resident real estate investors to build duplexes by right in our single-family residential neighborhoods. It would have effectively eliminated single-family zoning, only without calling it that. The proposal departed from most Cape towns' ADU rules that require residency in one of the units. In 2021, the Town Council amended that proposal to allow rental of only one unit at a time. It also rejected the Realtor lobby and a chamber request for summer rental durations. The very next day, commercial interests and some councilors that want investor duplexes by right committed to revisiting these restrictions. As in the short-term rental matter, the zoning subcommittee's ADU proposal tracked the Realtor lobby ADU proposal. The ADU proposal would have, in a very backdoor way, eliminated single-family zoning by permitting non-resident real estate investors to convert our single-family homes into duplexes by right. That means without notice to neighbors, without a permit, without anything at all. The planning department's messaging around the ADU proposal wasn't that. It messaged the housing crisis, which had been irrelevant in the Airbnb debate. It messaged residents aging in place and flexibility for local homeowners to earn some rental income. You were one amendment away in the final vote from eliminating single-family zoning where you bought your home, without the benefit of candid and direct communication to you about that. In their words, at a December 2020 Housing Committee meeting, a real estate developer talked about developing two-family homes as of right in our single-family residential neighborhoods. Town staff responded by asking the developer if the proposed ADU zoning change came close enough. The developer responded, yes, it did, because the proposal didn't require either of the units to be owner-occupied and allowed both to be rented at the same time. In their words, in conversation about the ADU proposal, a developer told the zoning subcommittee that without an ADU owner occupancy requirement, there would be a huge push from real estate investors looking to buy up our scarce housing. The zoning subcommittee then went on to propose just that. It would have had investors counting on two rental income streams at every single-family residential property, outbidding locals for housing and driving up the price of homes and rentals. In their words, the town planning director said the ADU proposal was a baby step to pushing back on the legacy of single-family residential zoning. Expect investor duplexes by right in our single-family residential neighborhoods to be back in the 2021 Local Comprehensive Plan. Next, let's talk about form-based zoning. We'll call it what it is, look and density zoning. If you look at the town's website and all of its public communications, you would believe that this proposal was about downtown Hyannis and only downtown Hyannis. You'd have to catch one housing committee meeting long ago during the workday with no public present to know that staff says its goal has always been to move it to other villages. Look and density zoning is about looks, not about property use. We'll talk more about that. A primary goal is to increase density and height. It also reduces required parking. The planning department has been working with largely self-selected business interests on look and density zoning through the ad hoc Economic Development Task Force since 2019. In July of 2021, the planning department announced that it would begin the public process of taking feedback on this proposal. In 2018, the Realtor Lobby urged the town to move forward with this kind of zoning, and in 2020, the Realtor Lobby funded public officials training about it. Look, we're not zoning experts, and this does not express an opinion about form-based or look and density zoning. It's a massive zoning change, though. There's a lot to learn, a lot to understand, and a lot to consider. To date, the material about form-based zoning that's been presented to the public doesn't spell it out in simple terms. There hasn't been a presentation of the changes in relation to current zoning. We hope that happens. The point is, pay attention, and pay attention now, because staff's goal has always been to move it. A word on process. This is a quick snapshot of the process the planning department used to develop the form-based or look and density zoning proposal. It followed the routine. First, business interests. Years later, residents get a chance to react, and quickly. On the far left, you'll see the Realtor Lobby encourage the town to consider a form-based zoning code back in 2018. On the far right, you'll see in August of 2021 that the planning department commenced the public process. In the intervening years, the planning department worked on the form-based zoning code proposal with the largely self-selected commercial interests on the Economic Development Task Force. By the way, the task force has no role in zoning in our town code, and there was no record of this work on the town's website over those intervening years. So what is form-based zoning? It's a move away from zoning based on the use of a property. Let's talk about it in their words. Form-based zoning changes the zoning so that the form of the building, the size, the height, the amount of lot coverage, the amount of parking required, that's what the zoning dictates. What the use is inside is not dictated by zoning. So you could construct a 3-story building and you could put 6 large high-end apartments in there or 15 one-bedroom apartments in there, as long as you can meet the parking requirements. Density is up to the developer and really dictated by parking. We'll talk more about parking because an accompanying change to this form-based zoning code is to reduce the amount of parking a developer would be required to provide. So in form-based zoning, what the zoning code cares about is how a building looks from the outside and increasing density. These are a couple of images from a presentation by the town's consultant given in August of 21. On the left, you'll see standards for all districts in connection with building standards. It governs things like frontage types, facades, front doors, number of stories, or height. On the right, you see an image about building massing that sets out setbacks, lot lines, minimal curb cuts, and so forth. It's all about density. Here are 2 more slides from the town consultant's presentation. On the left, you'll see what's called a use table. Remember, form-based zoning moves away from caring about how property owners actually use their buildings. What's notable here under commercial services and retail sales is that it's use by exception. Without a table showing what is currently permitted in the various zones by way of use, you really need to memorize the current zoning code to understand what is being proposed to change from what to what and where. The planning department has indicated that was good feedback, and we're hoping for a comparative chart from the current use to the proposed uses to help residents really understand the use changes. On the right, you'll see the parking requirements and the minimum required for developers. The town is proposing to reduce the amount of required parking in order to maximize the amount of developable land. The town has also reduced that number to below what the consultant had recommended. Parking has been a primary concern in every meeting to date about form-based zoning. The answer to the question of whether this proposal addresses Hyannis's long-term known parking problems was no. So how is it the planning department would know whether the public actually wants this change away from use-based zoning to a form of zoning that emphasizes and increases density, reduces parking, increases height, and really cares only about what a building looks like? The planning department measured community support for look and density zoning through what they call a visual preference survey that went out online through a SurveyMonkey. The town basically asked people what pictures they thought were prettier, and then took those answers and translated that into assumptions about this community's preference for density zoning. These are two images from the town's actual survey, which they asked residents to pick which homes were prettier and translated those answers into residents' presumed preferences about increasing density and moving to density zoning. On the left, you see what is something of an sort of old, sterile, gray, boxy, single-family house. The blinds are drawn. You can find one shrub there with a few flagstones. And compare that to the picture on the right of a really lovely, warmly lit home taken in the golden hour of a multifamily with really pretty porches and sidewalks. That picture was translated into your preferences about increasing density and a move to density zoning. It's not unlike asking, what banana would you prefer to eat? This sort of brown, rotten one, or would you like these 3 or 4 lovely yellow ones? Let's talk about the visual preference survey in their words. Staff reported that the purpose of the visual preference survey was to understand the preferences of the community as far as density, building mass, building design, building styles go, and then turn that into by right zoning. The response was, well, when then someone stands up at a town meeting or in any public forum and says, hey, I don't like that, we don't like that, we at least have an answer. We poll the community, and this is what they said. Staff replied, we went through a really big outreach effort, and this is what the majority of people do prefer. We're going to take those preferences, we're going to move them into zoning. So what's the really big outreach that shows what the majority of people do prefer by way of density zoning? About 140 people in Hyannis, we believe, replied to an online survey about pictures of pretty houses and not so pretty houses. That's about 1% of Hyannis Village population, or about 0.003% of the town of Barnstable's population. I'll note that about twice the number of residents signed a petition to form a resident zoning task force to give residents a greater voice in zoning matters in town. The other public participation to date, in 2021, the planning department held a workshop. About 10 people participated, saw about 3 regulars, 4 public officials, and a few others. Some prior workshops looked to have about 30 attendees if you include town staff and public officials. So this is an important point. Let's not confuse asking residents their impressions of pictures of houses that were put together by an architectural firm that's paid to promote density with a broad-based, impartial, valid, reliable survey of residents' views about eliminating zoning based on use and changing to zoning that increases density, height, and reduced parking. On the right is a slide by the architectural firm that created the survey that sort of mocks the notion of concern about density. Let's all acknowledge that the image survey was designed by a firm that sells density. It's not a zoning survey, it's not impartial, and it's not a reliable measure of residents' views about their zoning preferences. So where is the planning department proposing look and density zoning? The planning department's public communications about form-based zoning are exclusively about downtown Hyannis. In fact, if you go to the town's website to find information about form-based zoning, you have to open the tab about Hyannis zoning changes. But wait. In their words, back in 2019, the planning department staff told the housing committee, "Our goal has always been to be able to replicate this in other areas. That would be our goal. We'd say, okay, absolutely. Now let's replicate this in the village center of Marston's Mills, in the village center of Osterville and Barnstable. We'll move it." This intent and goal to move form-based zoning to other villages is nowhere in the town's current public communication about form-based zoning. One would have to go back to watch an August 2019 Housing Committee meeting that meets, by the way, during the workday to learn the staff's goal to move this form-based zoning to other villages. The Cape Cod Commission has decided that 3 villages here in Barnstable have so much in common that they should have similar zoning changes. Those 3 villages are Barnstable Village, Hyannis, and Osterville. Each has been designated a, quote, community activity center. We've yet to find people who've been consulted or asked to comment about that designation or what it means or the commonality between those 3 villages and the extent to which there should be similar zoning changes and why. You won't find information about the designation in the planning department's public communication about form-based zoning. We heard about it when a counselor asked the planning department about this, quote, community activity center in a public meeting. It happened to be a counselor who represented Barnstable Village and didn't seem to be aware of the designation or what it meant. So what does it mean to be designated a, quote, community activity center by the Cape Cod Commission? It means that the Cape Cod Commission wants the town to consider changing zoning in those 3 villages to allow higher density, to allow multifamily housing and inclusionary zoning bylaws. Remember back now when housing was entirely irrelevant in the debate over the commercial use of homes as Airbnb businesses. Well, as soon as that debate ended, everything became all about housing. The planning department portrays density zoning as all about housing too. For instance, it says it's designed to meet a range of housing needs by encouraging a concentrated mix of residential and commercial uses and compact residential development. Here's the twist. This density zoning brings density, but doesn't require the homes enabled by that density to actually be used as homes for locals. Last year at a stakeholder meeting, a local resident stood up and asked the town's consultant on form-based zoning, hey, what about these Airbnbs in this plan that's supposed to be about increasing housing to meet our housing needs? The consultant said, sure, the town can go ahead and restrict Airbnb use of homes in the form-based zoning context. Yet the current form-based zoning proposal has no requirement at all for homes to be used as homes or any limits or restrictions on their being used as short-term rental businesses. There's no answer provided by the planning department to a question posed on its public forum about this really important question about whether homes will actually be used as homes. The verbal answer that the planning department gave more recently at a workshop was, hey, the market will take care of it, just let the market respond. There's a common understanding based on experience that Airbnbs tend to bring higher numbers of cars and require extra parking. Most people know that from general experience, and the town certainly knows that based on its prior survey of residents on short-term rentals. Complaints about parking and extra cars around Airbnbs was a really common theme in residents' comments provided to the town in that context. Yet in the form-based zoning code, while it allows any and all homes to be used as short-term rentals. There's no provision at all for extra parking needs at homes that could be used as Airbnbs. There's also been a suggestion to use your tax dollars to incent year-round rentals, while the town allows all homes to be used as commercial short-term rentals and is proposing to increase density to bring in even more homes that could also be used as short-term rentals. The consultant, by the way, said to expect units brought about by the form-based zoning code to be expensive and at the upper end of the market rate. So what's the right approach for a community with a housing crisis? Is it to do what communities with housing crises do across the country and restrict the use of homes as homes and the right to short-term rent to people who actually live in those homes sometimes? Or is it to leave it to real estate developers that want to maximize profits to use homes here any way they like, including as Airbnb businesses? The fact is this: Airbnb is the economically rational choice to maximize revenue at residential real estate properties. This is grounded in experience and math, not in speculation. Here on the left, you see the first mixed-use property in the GIZ. The GIZ is the Growth Incentive Zone in downtown Hyannis. That's where form-based zoning is intended to commence. Back in 2008, the first floor was a commercial enterprise. Above it were 2 year-round housing units. Form-based zoning is intended to encourage more of that. Now speed the clock ahead. In 2021, the owner of that property has monetized those units into 3 Airbnbs. Wait for more of that in the form-based zoning code. Now, the owner of this former mixed-use property in Hyannis came into public comment before the town council and urged the council to pass the ADU ordinance. The reason was we have a housing crisis, we have housing needs, and people were suffering. That was after the owner has converted 4 units to 4 Airbnb businesses. The 4th is nearby. A note on that. It's something you won't hear about from our town hall and you didn't read about in our local press. That 4th Airbnb was the location of Hyannis's Airbnb shooting. That's a thing, Airbnb shootings. They're reported all over the country, not here. What we know from the police scanner, and that is a young man was shot. After that, masked men fled through a residential neighborhood near downtown Hyannis. Police then did a neighborhood lockdown to execute a manhunt. There's a reason some Airbnb terms and conditions like one-night rentals are called high-risk rentals. In form-based zoning, parking is the tail that wags the dog. Now, parking isn't zoning, but this zoning proposal that maxes out building density in our village centers and adds height is entirely about parking, only without a plan for where residents, employees, customers, and our visitors will actually put their cars. Wait for Boston-style parking frustration in our village centers, only here without a T, without cabs, without things like work and groceries and stores and doctors in walking distance. How does it do that? It reduces the required dedicated parking spots from 1.5 per bedroom to just 1. That's below the 1.3 that the consultant tested. In their words, planning department staff said it just allows you to build whatever dwelling units you can if you can park it at that reduced required parking rate. Staff hopes for shared parking agreements between private property owners. Let's do better than hoping. It's really imperative that our residents and our businesses really understand and think through the implications of this significant parking change in our village centers. Some town councilors answer to every resident's concern, question, or objection to zoning change proposals is, hey, we can fix this in 2 reads. What does that even mean? The suggestion is that the town council could undo the zoning proposal by putting out a couple of meeting agendas and then taking a revote on the zoning proposal. It basically says to residents, hey, pipe down, we can fix this thing. Well, you know what? Zoning and zoning to increase density isn't like the speed limit. You can't just vote to increase it one year and then next year vote to reduce it again. Can anyone explain how the council could vote to undo maxed out building density, to undo the footprint of a building, or undo a cookie cutter building aesthetic? How would the council undo increased building height after buildings are built with more stories? How would the council go back and tell a real estate developer, hey, we're sorry, we made a mistake by not requiring you to have parking spots for all your residents. And our village parking is kind of out of control and kind of horrible for our businesses. You don't actually do that. You don't just undo those kinds of changes. It's really imperative that the community, the whole community, not 140 people or even 5 times that many that cast a vote in a pretty house photo contest, think they express their opinion. It's imperative that the whole community, where form-based zoning code is proposed to be and where the town staff wants to move it, really understand what it is, what it proposes to change from and to, and its long-term implications on the character and quality of our village, that essential quality that makes people want to call this place home and that makes so many more people want to come to visit us year after year. Now, here are some predictions for the outcome of our 2021 Local Comprehensive Plan. This isn't wholesale speculation. This is based on what we've seen and heard to date. First, look for homogenized villages. What does that even mean? It means a move away from our historic, unique character in our village centers to large block buildings with sort of a predetermined look, a cookie cutter aesthetic. Every other town, USA, all in the name of easing development and maximizing density. Watch for a move to eliminate our single-family residential zoning. Wait for proposals that will maximize building density and increase building height. Look for a revisit of the proposal to allow real estate investors to build duplexes by right in our single-family residential neighborhoods. Wait for that to come with a proposal to reduce rental periods below what our locals need, which is year-round housing. Wait for form-based zoning to appear in other villages, also in the name of, again, increasing density and easing development. Watch for top-of-shop housing proposals and mixed-use development proposals. That will come without a requirement to use homes as homes for residents. Look for reduced parking requirements placed on developers in our village centers in the name of paving the way to development and density. Wait for the affordable ADU program's demise. Wait to hear the word affordable housing substituted with words like attainable housing or workforce housing. That would be consistent with developers' expressed desire to put a moratorium on inclusionary housing obligations. Wait to hear talk about your tax dollars to be used to incent landlords to rent on a year-round basis. That would offset what the town permits now, which is this anything goes use of homes as Airbnb businesses. Also, wait to hear more about the use of your tax dollars to fund development of town property. Let's talk about our housing crisis. It's real, and local residents need help. There's a lot of work to do, serious work, in Barnstable to relieve the housing crisis and to help local residents. But we can't invoke the housing crisis as priority only for those zoning changes that are about maxing out density and increasing height and easing development or turning density over to developers. All of that, of course, increases the tax base, so wait for it. We also can't assume that increased density will actually serve our local residents' needs. Even in this village center density zoning change proposal that is portrayed as being all about housing, The current planning department proposals, even in there, would let investors use new homes enabled by that density as Airbnb businesses. And we all know that housing and local residents' needs for housing was irrelevant when the town chose to look away from non-resident investors converting an unlimited amount of our current housing stock into Airbnb businesses, because that, of course, generates tax revenue too. In Barnstable, housing has mattered, but only sometimes. We can do better, and we can do better without wiping out single-family zoning or turning density decisions over to real estate developers. So the question is, does this 2021 planning process matter to you? And does it matter to you enough for you to show up and have a voice? The fact is, we don't actually have a government by the people. We have a government by the people who show up. So the question is, do you care about what your neighborhood looks like, your village center looks like, and your town looks like, and the house next door to you looks like a decade from now? Do you want all the villages to be effectively homogenized? Do you want to max out density both in your village center and in perimeters around your village center? Because that's coming too. Do you care about parking and accessibility and sort of ease of life in our village centers? Do you want to preserve single-family residential neighborhoods, or do you want real estate investors to be able to create duplexes by right everywhere? Do you want to spend your own tax dollars to incent landlords to long-term rent their properties to meet housing needs, while the town allows any and every house in this town to be used by investors as commercial Airbnbs? These are the kind of questions that hopefully will drive you to say, this planning process that's upcoming matters to me. It matters to my home, my family, this village, our community. Let's talk for a minute about the Barnstable Planning Department's processes. Processes matter. They influence outcomes and often also determine outcomes. Here's the thing, transparency is for those who carry out public duties and exercise public power. Privacy is for everyone else. The reason transparency matters so much is because it brings trust. Let's talk for just a minute or two about the planning department processes and transparency. Barnstable Watch started really following how the Barnstable Planning Department does its work on planning and zoning in the short-term rental matter. And we learned some things. One is how the planning department works on zoning proposals. Commercial interests are often brought in early and given time to influence proposals well before a public process even starts. That often happens out of public view. Proposals are often not developed through those boards and committees that are assigned to the subject by our town code. That makes it really hard for residents who want to follow zoning to know where to look, when to find it, what's going on where. Public communications often lack candor and critical specifics. Example, the town staff goal is to duplicate form-based zoning in other villages. Well, you know what? Tell the people that. What we get 3 minutes down the road for one-way comment after proposals are fairly well-baked. This is a pattern. It's a matter of record. The pattern is a matter of record. This is not an opinion. Another thing we've learned, there's been a decline in our local news coverage of our town hall. That decline hinders public awareness of how the town does town business. It also enables this pattern of out of the public view zoning process and this pattern of this business at the front of the zoning bus here in Barnstable. Our local media has reduced staff. This is a national problem, and it means even less transparency into local government. So what else we've learned? We've learned we need to watch every meeting. We've learned to be grateful for Channel 18 for enabling that. We've learned we need to insist on meeting minutes of the public bodies doing public business. We have had to ask for those minutes too many times. We need to look in the nooks and crannies, and we need to look in unexpected places for where the town is doing our business. We need to ask questions, and we need to follow up on those questions when the answers are non-responsive. We need to follow up on those answers when they are run-on, buzzword-laden answers. Watch Channel 18, Planning and Zoning, for yourself and determine for yourself whether that characterization of too many zoning answers is fair. Now let's put a finer point on the point. On the left, you see where the town code says the town will do housing and zoning work. We have a housing committee. Its job is to do housing work. In the housing crisis, it was largely dormant in 20 and in the first half of 2021. In a minute, we'll see why. The planning board, which is to recommend zoning proposals, in recent years receives zoning proposals developed by others and votes them out, often in just one meeting, and often with an explicit statement, hey, let's send this proposal back to the elected officials. So where has the planning department been doing housing and zoning work instead? One place is through something called the Economic Development Task Force. That was a largely self-selected commercial interest group. The town had effectively no records to appointments of members after the initial members were appointed 2 years ago. The minutes to that task force were kept in the planning department's desk drawer for 2.5 years until a resident realized that this task force had been working on zoning and asked to see them. Try following that, a group or a body not charged by our town code to do zoning, not obviously a zoning group in any way, and with basically no web presence and no minutes. Once someone asked to see those minutes, we should never have to ask to see minutes, one can learn that that task force created a housing and an inclusionary housing subcommittee. Those two subcommittees had no agendas posted on our town website ever. How on earth would anyone in this town who has an interest in housing or inclusionary housing ever have the opportunity to follow what our planning department is talking about with this self-created public body? It also had no minutes. So good luck following that. This is simply not the way government is designed to run or should run, and we should not tolerate it being run this way. We are grateful that the town has eliminated that task force. Now what we should do is wait for the housing committee to get active once again. It is important to note here that the way this public body has been run is no reflection on the volunteer members who signed up to donate their time. We are grateful to them. This is about how Town Hall administers our business in a way that is non-transparent to the public. We thank those Barnstable Watch members who spend their free time, evenings, weekends, researching, watching town meetings on Channel 18, reading minutes, thinking about and researching planning and zoning in other communities, and sharing that information with us. We love how much you love your home, your neighborhood, your village, and this whole community. Thank you.